was just a bowl. Not the painted one with blue curls along the rim. Not the sacred one they used for yam offerings or the copper-bottomed basin reserved for guests. Just a plain one. Clay, a little chipped, one of the older ones that lived on the bottom shelf, barely noticed until it was needed. But it slipped. Wet hands, a slick floor, a noise outside. Nena couldn't even say what caused it. Only that it shattered. And the sound rang through the house like a bell meant to summon punishment. The silence afterward was louder. She stood there, heart thudding, eyes wide, pieces of clay at her feet. Her fingers trembled. She bent to gather the shards, thinking she might sweep them before anyone saw. But then she heard his footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Heavy in that way that always meant he had taken off his slippers. He didn't like noise when he punished. Said he wanted the house to listen. Nena. She straightened quickly. Shards still in her hand. He stood in the doorway, backlit by the sun, making his shape seem larger than it was. His shirt was open, sweat staining his chest. His eyes did not move to the broken bowl. Only to her hands. Then to her face. What happened? She hesitated. It slipped. Pause. Which one? She held up a jagged piece to show. Just the old bowl. The one no one would miss. The one that wouldn't even be remembered if she had swept it away fast enough. He turned without a word and walked out of view. For a moment she thought he would let it go. She knelt again and began gathering the rest, careful not to cut herself. But her breath was fast. Her chest tight. Then he returned. And in his hand, the cane. The kind he kept beneath the bed. Made from palm stem, stripped smooth and oiled so it hissed in the air when he used it. Her mother appeared too just behind him. She wore her wrapper tight, arms crossed. Her face unreadable. Her eyes flicked once from the cane to Nena, then back again. Mama? Don't talk, her stepfather said. He stepped forward. And without another word he struck. The cane caught her across the back first, once, twice, and then across her thigh. She screamed. The pain bloomed hot and fast, like the sting of fire ants spreading under her skin. She tried to run. He grabbed her arm. Yanked her back. Another strike, this time down the length of her forearm. She dropped the bowl shards. They scattered again. Filth, he muttered. You dirty everything you touch. I said I'm sorry. The cane lifted. But this time it did not fall immediately. He looked at her arm. At the welt already forming. Then, as if struck by inspiration, he said, Hold it out. What? Hold. Out. Her mother's breath caught behind them. Nena shook her head slowly, fear washing over her in waves. He reached forward, grabbed her wrist and yanked it upward. Her arm trembled in the air, stretched tight. Then, with one sharp movement, he brought the cane down, not across but along her forearm, slicing through skin. She shrieked. Blood welled instantly. The pain came not in a scream but in a breathless silence. Her knees buckled. He dropped the cane. And picked up a small pouch from the table. From it he poured salt. Coarse. Sure. Gray-white. Kitchen salt, the kind they used for thick stews and fish rubs. She saw it in his hand. Tried to pull away. But he gripped her tighter. And rubbed it into the open wound. She screamed so loud the neighbors later said they felt it in their teeth. The salt sizzled against her skin. Not literally, but it felt that way. Like fire crawling through her blood, like her bone had been peeled open. Her mother did not move. She stood there, mouth slightly open, one hand clenching the edge of her wrapper. She must learn, her stepfather said. Pain cleans what filth cannot. He let go. Nena crumpled. She curled in on herself, holding her bleeding arm, sobs tearing from her throat. No one came to help. No one lifted her. No one offered water or cloth. Her mother turned and walked away. The cane lay on the floor beside the blood. That night Nena could not sleep. Her body throbbed in silence. She lay on her mat, unable to turn without feeling the deep burn in her arm. Every breath pulled at the wound. She had rinsed it herself in the backyard beneath the old tap with the leaky spout. Cold water, nothing else. The soap stung too much. She didn't bandage it. Let the air touch it, thinking maybe it would help. But the salt remained. She could feel it under her skin. Not just the grain but the words. Pain cleans what filth cannot. They echoed in her head like a drumbeat. Over and over. By morning her arm was swollen. Purple in places. Shiny and angry looking. But she said nothing. Not to her mother. Not to the neighbors. Not to her friends. Because something else had broken inside her. Something quieter than the bowl. Something that didn't make a sound when it shattered. And though the wound would heal, slowly, painfully, leaving a scar that stretched like a crooked river from her wrist to her elbow. That first salt cut would always return in her memory. The first wound. The first truth. That in her house, a mistake was not a thing to correct. It was a thing to bleed for. And that the people meant to shield you could be the ones who taught you how to suffer in silence. It should have healed by now. The bruises on her back had faded to a dull yellow like tired fruit. The cane marks on her thighs had thinned into brown lines, easy to hide beneath her wrapper. The welt on her cheek had peeled and disappeared like it never happened at all. But the cut on her arm, the one her stepfather sliced with the cane before rubbing salt into it, remained. At first it scabbed like any other wound. Rough and dry, pulled tight like old fabric. Then it softened and the edges darkened, and Nena thought maybe it was finally closing. But by the third week it hadn't disappeared, not fully. It stayed, thick and raised, a pale line that curved unnaturally down the length of her forearm like something etched, not wounded. Like a message meant to remain. She pressed on it once and felt a throb. Not pain exactly, but heat. A small pulse that flared under her skin and vanished. She didn't tell anyone. Not her mother, not the neighbor woman who had started watching her more closely when she washed clothes in the yard, not the girl at school who asked, "What happened to your arm?" and then didn't wait for an answer. Some nights, when she couldn't sleep and lay staring at the mosquito net above her head, she would run her fingers over the scar. It wasn't smooth. It felt almost alive. Warm sometimes. Like it remembered things. Like it didn't belong to her skin anymore. The first time she heard it, she had just returned from the stream. She was rinsing her feet, sitting behind the hut where the walls crumbled and the earth smelled of ash. The air was heavy, wet from an early rain. The trees whispered as they often did. She peeled off her wrapper to check the wound, thinking maybe she could press some leaves against it. But the moment her thumb brushed the scar, she heard it. A faint sound. Like weeping. Very faint. Like someone far away crying into a pillow. Not loud. Not begging. Just sadness. Slow, continuous. She froze. Her hand pulled back. She listened. The sound stopped. She looked around. The chickens were quiet. No one else was nearby. Her mother was out selling beans in the next town. Her stepfather had gone with her. The house was empty. So, she touched it again. The weeping returned. Quieter now but unmistakable. She snatched her hand away. That night she didn't sleep at all. She lay curled on her side, arm tucked beneath her, the scar burning softly like coal pressed under skin. She didn't cry. She didn't pray. She just waited, watched the shadows move across the walls, and wondered if something had been left inside her, something more than pain. The following morning she tried to ignore it. She wrapped her arm with old cloth before going to school. Said it was a scratch. Pretended it was nothing. But during class, when her teacher handed her a slate and their fingers brushed, the woman flinched. Her eyes widened. She stared at Nena's bandaged arm like it had spoken. "Are you all right?" she asked. Nena nodded too quickly. The teacher didn't believe her. But she said nothing more. At lunch, Nena unwrapped the cloth and checked the wound again. The skin was dark around the edges now, shiny and stretched. The scar pulsed, once then again, and she felt it, that heat, that humming. And beneath it, the sound. Not just weeping now but something else. Breath. Slow, shallow. She covered it again. By the time she returned home, the scar had started to sting. Not from outside, from within. Like something under the skin had begun to twist. That night, she lit a candle and held it near her arm to see clearly. The line had split open. Not bleeding. Just open. Like lips parting to speak. She backed away. The air smelled strange, like wet soil and copper. She didn't scream. She didn't call for help. No one would have come. Instead she stared. Waited. Watched. The wound didn't close. It didn't gush blood. It just stayed open. She sat cross-legged on the floor, her knees trembling. Her fingers hovered near it, but she didn't touch. She didn't want to hear more. She didn't want to know what it would say. But it spoke anyway. Not in words. In feeling. A wave of sorrow surged through her chest, rising up like river water after too much rain. It wasn't hers. It didn't belong to her memories or her thoughts. It was something older, something that had waited. The sadness of someone who had once cried alone for days. A girl maybe. A name pressed too deep to remember. And Nena wept. Not because it hurt. Not because she was afraid. But because the sorrow needed somewhere to go. And her body had been chosen to carry it. The next morning the wound had sealed again. Not fully. Not cleanly. But closed enough to cover the truth. She wore long sleeves to school after that. Stopped going to the stream. Stopped touching the scar. But it kept waking. Every few days it opened again, sometimes just a little, sometimes enough to stain her sleeve. Always silently. Always heat first, then the sound. The weeping. The breath. And in time she realized it wasn't a wound anymore. It was a door. To something. To someone. She didn't know who. But they were waiting. And the scar had no intention of fading. There were now 5 scars on Nena's body that never stopped humming. One along her arm, the first one the one from the broken bowl, the salt, the scream. Another just beneath her left shoulder, from when she dropped the cup while fetching water and the cane found her there. A third near her thigh where she flinched too slowly. A fourth on her hip, where her stepfather struck her just to remind her she was still under his roof. And the newest, barely 2 days old, sat fresh and angry across her back, not yet sealed, still weeping at the edges. Each time the cane hit her now, the world didn't blur the same way. She still cried, yes, but not the same kind of crying. Something inside her had begun to shift, not toward numbness, not the dull silence of surrender, but toward something harder, stranger, quieter. Every scar that came after the first felt less like a punishment and more like a message. Because at night the scars hummed. The first time she noticed it, she thought it was the wind. A low, steady sound just beneath hearing. Not quite music, not quite a voice, more like the way water sounds when it's deep in the ground. A kind of vibration. She sat up, listening, but there was nothing outside her window. The goats were asleep. The crickets had gone silent. She touched the scar on her shoulder. The hum grew louder. Not in her ears. In her bones. And then, very faintly from the edges of the room came the chants. Not words she understood. But rhythmic. Repeated. Oh. Not one voice, many. Women mostly. Not yelling, not moaning. Singing almost. Like lullabies buried in the earth. She sat with her knees drawn to her chest, listening. She was alone in the room. Her mother had gone to sleep. Her stepfather was snoring from the other side of the house. There were no drums outside. No ceremonies tonight. But the voices were real. She felt them in her teeth. In her chest. In the thin webs of her fingers. And then, something stranger happened. When she rose from the mat to pour water into a small bowl, her feet made no sound on the floor. None at all. As if the wood had softened under her. As if it had been told she was coming and chose not to creak. She moved again. Still no sound. She poured the water. And when the bowl slipped, the ceramic edge clipping the side of the table, she reached for it. Too late. It fell. She winced, expecting the crash. But it landed on the floor softly. As if caught. As if the very air had cushioned it. She picked it up, blinking. Her heart beat slowly. Not in fear. In wonder. The humming grew again. That night, her sleep was thick and strange. In her dreams, she walked through a field of ash. The sky was red. Not from fire, from memory. She didn't walk with her feet. She floated, glided, and as she moved, other girls followed her. Silent. Barefoot. Covered in scars that glowed like threadwork across their skin. She turned to them. They did not speak. They only placed their hands over their wounds. And hummed. When she woke, her bedsheet was damp with sweat. The air in the room smelled faintly of something burnt, not firewood, not cloth. Something deeper. The floor beneath her was scorched. Not blackened. Not burned through. But faintly darkened, as though something hot had rested there. She looked at her palms. They were dry. She touched the floor. Cool. But the burn mark remained. She pressed her forehead to her knees and breathed slowly. Then she wept. But the tears didn't fall as they used to. They were warm then hot. When one landed on the floor, it hissed. She jerked back. A small patch of the wood sizzled faintly where the tear had landed. She wept again, carefully watching. Each tear that hit the floor left a mark, not deep but visible. Small dark spots like embers. By morning they had faded. But her skin still hummed. The voices still whispered, not constantly, but enough that she knew she wasn't alone anymore. At school she moved differently. Her steps were lighter. Not faster. Not frantic. Just quieter. More precise. As if her body had learned to slide past pain. She no longer flinched when the teachers shouted. She no longer ducked when someone raised a hand. Even when her stepfather glanced at her with his usual disgust, she held his gaze longer. Not as defiance. But as prophecy. He didn't know it yet, but something was waking in her. Each blow, each bruise, each salted cut had not broken her. They had stirred something ancient. Her body was no longer just flesh. It had become a vessel. Each mark hummed with memory. Each wound whispered in language only she could hear. And the pain no longer asked to be pitied. It had become a drum. And it was learning how to sing. It began with the soup. A simple bowl of okra stew, nothing unusual. Nena had stirred it herself, careful not to let it burn. She had chopped the onions the way her mother taught her, added pepper and palm oil, then a pinch of salt, just enough. She served her stepfather first, as always, the way her mother insisted. He sat cross-legged on the mat, his legs wide, his chest bare, fanning himself lazily. He scooped the first swallow into his mouth, paused and spat it out. "What is this?" he growled. "Poison?" Nena froze. "It's the same soup we always make," her mother said softly from the corner. She hadn't tasted it yet, was still nursing a headache from a long day under the sun. She turned to Nena with a weary frown. "You used too much salt?" Nena shook her head. "Only a little. The same amount." "Liar," he barked, pushing the bowl away. The red oil smeared across the mat. "It's bitter. Spoiled. You want to make me sick now, eh?" Nena opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked down at her hands. Her arm, beneath her wrapper, throbbed gently. A familiar warmth. One of her scars had started pulsing again, the one across her hip. She looked up and said nothing. The next morning he tried to eat yam and egg. The egg curdled in his mouth. "You spat that too?" He demanded fresh bread. It turned dry between his teeth. The juice they made from pawpaw fermented by noon. The rice tasted like ash. He accused Nena of sabotage. Then her mother. Then the neighbor who sold them pepper. He stormed through the kitchen, sniffing containers, tasting dry grains with his tongue like a rabid animal. He demanded they boil plain cassava. Even that soured in his mouth. By the third day he refused food entirely. He blamed the salt. "Don't use it," he growled. "None. None at all. Not in the stew. Not in the beans. Not a single grain." They obeyed. But even without it, the food tasted wrong to him. Sour. Chalky. Empty. He accused the water. Made them fetch from another stream. Same result. His belly began to shrink. His skin dried. He wouldn't admit it aloud, but the truth was written on his face. Nothing tasted right anymore. Not even the things he once loved, fried fish, bitter leaf soup, roasted groundnuts. Nothing. Everything turned bitter the moment it touched his lips. Nena watched silently from across the room as he forced himself to chew plain boiled yam. His eyes watered. His tongue recoiled. He cursed under his breath. Her scars tingled. She pressed her fingers against the one near her ribs. It hummed gently, almost like laughter under the skin. She didn't smile. Not exactly. But something inside her stood a little taller. Then her mother began coughing in her sleep. It wasn't a dry cough. It gurgled. Thick. What? At first Nena thought she was dreaming. Her mother's voice, always low and sharp, now rasped and sputtered in the night like someone drowning. Nena lit a candle and stepped closer to the mat. Her mother lay curled on her side, shaking. Nena knelt beside her, touched her shoulder. Her mother jerked awake, coughing harder. And from her mouth, water. Not spit. Not phlegm. Clear, briny water. Salt water. It dribbled from the corners of her mouth, soaking her wrapper. She looked confused, dazed. She sat up slowly, wiping her chin. "Is it raining?" she asked. Nena didn't answer. Her mother looked around, sniffed. "It smells like the sea." They lived far from the sea. Nena stood, blew out the candle and returned to her mat. The next night it happened again. And again. By the fifth night, her mother refused to sleep lying down. She sat with her back against the wall, dozing upright like a guard too tired to march. She never said the word curse. But her eyes, each time she looked at Nena, carried a new uncertainty. Not fear exactly. Not regret. But something heavier. Something that tasted like salt. Nena continued cooking. She added nothing unusual to the food. No herbs. No powders. Just yam. Just stew. Just rice. Just silence. And every time her stepfather brought food to his mouth, he flinched. Even fresh fruit turned sour on his tongue. He began to avoid the kitchen. Then the dining mat. Then Nena's gaze. She caught him once in the middle of the night, standing over her mat. Watching her. His shoulders stooped. His chest sunken. He didn't say a word. Didn't raise his hand. He just watched. And she knew then that he felt it too. The shift. The change. That the same salt he once rubbed into her wounds now followed him into his own mouth. That the pain he'd fed her in silence now spoiled everything he touched. She touched the scar on her back. It buzzed warmly under her fingers. Not angrily. Not cruelly. Just awake. A memory that had learned to speak. Later that week, her mother spilled a bowl of drinking water. When she wiped it from the floor, she hesitated, touched it with her fingers, and brought them to her lips. She spat instantly. "Salty," she whispered. She looked at Nena, her face pale. Did you salt the water?" Nena shook her head. Her mother stood slowly, backed away. That night, her coughing worsened. Nena listened from her mat as the gurgles came again, louder, wet like waves crashing inside her lungs. She no longer lit candles. She didn't check. She didn't speak. She just listened. And her scars pulsed. Not with rage. Not with joy. But with something older. Something like justice. Not revenge. Not punishment. Just truth, echoing back into the mouths that had denied it. By the time the rains returned, her stepfather had stopped eating entirely. He lived on dry bread and boiled roots, chewed slowly like sand. His hands trembled. His eyes dimmed. And every time he sat too close to Nena, the smell of salt filled the room. He moved out of the bedroom, claimed the back hut for himself. He told the neighbors it was for peace, that he needed silence to sleep. But Nena knew. He couldn't stand to be near her anymore. Couldn't look at the scars without feeling his own tongue shrivel. Couldn't hear her footsteps without tasting bitterness. Couldn't stand the way she stirred soup and made no noise. The way her presence ruined flavor. Her mother no longer called her useless. She no longer barked commands. Only stared every morning at the basin of water before drinking. Sniffed it once. Dipped a finger. And hesitated. Nena washed the pots in silence. The salt never left her hands. But now, it only spoiled those who had taught her to suffer. The day began like any other, a heavy sky, a crooked sun, and a list of things Nena was expected to do before dusk. Sweep the compound. Wash the plates. Scrub the basin. Carry the calabash to the river for water, twice if the rain didn't come. She listened to her mother's instructions in silence, eyes down, hands folded over the fresh scar still healing near her elbow. The humming hadn't stopped. Every night now, her body whispered. Not just one scar, all of them humming faintly beneath her skin like bees trapped under glass. The sound didn't hurt. It soothed. But it kept her awake sometimes, made the air feel too full, like something was pressing against her from within. She wrapped a strip of cloth around her arm and started the walk to the river. The path was familiar. Red soil, winding curves, birdsong above and the occasional thorn brushing against her calf. Other girls walked the same trail, usually in groups, laughing, slapping at mosquitoes, teasing each other. But Nena walked alone. The last time she joined them, one of them said her name too softly, like it might summon something. Another looked at her and muttered, "She's different now." The next day no one waited for her at the fork in the road. So she stopped expecting company. She reached the river by mid-morning. It wasn't large, just a wide stream that cut through the village like a slow ribbon, shallow enough in some places to wade across barefoot. The trees leaned over it protectively, their branches dropping leaves into the water like tiny boats. She knelt at the edge and lowered the calabash into the current, watching it fill slowly. The river was cooler than usual. The rainy season had been slow to start this year, and the villagers were beginning to murmur about dry spells and bad omens. Her arm ached. She unwrapped the cloth and stared at the wound, not fresh but not closed either. A scab had formed, cracked slightly in the center. Beneath it, the skin pulsed faintly. The humming returned. She looked around. No one else was near. The other girls must have already come and gone. Birds chirped somewhere beyond the trees. A frog leapt into the water upstream, breaking the silence with a single plop. She reached out. Let her fingers trail into the river. The moment her wand touched the surface, the water hissed. Not loudly, but sharp enough to make her flinch. She pulled her arm back. Steam rose briefly from the water. Her heart thudded. She waited. Then, slowly, she dipped her hand again, this time on purpose. The river did not hiss this time. But it shivered. A ripple spread outward, circling her arm like a halo. She leaned closer and saw the water directly beneath her hand begin to change. It shifted, not just in color but in weight and presence. The murkiness cleared. Leaves floated away. The silt settled. What remained was crystal, clean, sparkling water, so clear she could see her reflection perfectly. Her breath caught. Then it spread. The clarity moved like a blessing, stretching downstream, widening with every inch. Where the water had been muddy and tired, it now shimmered like glass under sunlight. Even the fish swam closer to the surface, flickering silver like they were waking from sleep. She drew her hand back. The hum in her scars was louder now. She sat stunned. The calabash floated gently beside her, already filled. Then came the voice. Not behind her. Not near. Across the river, beneath the shade of an old tree, sat 3 women. She hadn't noticed them before. They were old, the kind of old that made skin fold like paper and eyes peer out from deep caves of memory. One wore a red scarf with a tear at the edge. Another leaned on a crooked walking stick shaped like a question mark. The third held a long, smooth pipe between her fingers but didn't smoke it. They stared at her. Then the one in the middle, the pipe woman, spoke. "She has salt," she said softly. The second nodded. "Salt that cleanses." The third added, "Or curses." Nena didn't move. She didn't even pretend not to hear. Because in her heart, she knew it was true. The old women stood. They didn't cross the river. Didn't approach. They only turned and walked back into the trees, slow and sure, like they'd seen what they came to see. Nena looked down at her arm. The scar was glowing. Breath. Hesitant. Shaky. Soft feet. And then her mother knelt beside her. For the first time in years. She didn't say Nena's name. Not at first. She just looked at her. Eyes wide. Red at the corners. Hands trembling, hovering, unsure whether to touch or stay away. The silence between them stretched thin, stretched old, stretched until it felt like it might snap. And then she spoke. Not loud. Not rushed. But real. "Forgive me," she whispered. Nena blinked. "I was silenced by the same hands," her mother said, voice cracking. "Long before you were born. I forgot how to scream. I forgot how to stop him. I forgot how to protect." The words didn't fix the pain, but they reached it. Like water reaching thirsty roots. "I told myself that if I stayed quiet, you would survive." Her voice broke and a tear slipped down her cheek. "I was wrong." She reached forward gently and touched one of Nena's scars, the long one, the first one. Then, with trembling lips, she bent down and kissed it. The room changed. The air thickened. And Nena felt it, warmth flooding through her skin, a glow that grew and then faded gently like a sigh. The scar softened beneath the kiss. Then disappeared. Vanished like smoke. Nena gasped. She looked up. Her mother was weeping. But for the first time, Nena's own tears didn't burn. They didn't hiss. They didn't mark the floor. They simply fell. And she wept. For the first time in peace. They came for her before dawn, led by the village priest and 3 elders with ropes. They said nothing to her mother. They didn't offer a trial. Only a judgment. "Sorcery," one muttered. "Witch child," said another. Nena didn't fight. She rose from her mat in silence, her scars already humming softly beneath her skin. She walked with them barefoot through dust, down the path that led past the farms and toward the old cleansing pit, the place where curses were tested, where guilty souls were made to confess through fire or drown beneath salt. Women watched from behind doorways. Children stood behind trees. No one spoke, but all of them watched. She passed by the old tree near the stream and felt its branches tilt slightly toward her, as if in mourning or prayer. The pit was a sunken hollow, ringed with stone and dried palm branches. Ash clung to its walls. Bones of past sacrifices, animals, some said. People, others whispered, lay buried beneath it. The priest raised his staff. "She has made water turn bitter. Made tongues lose their taste. Her blood stirs voices. Her body glows with evil." Nena stood in the center of the pit. Her skin buzzed. Her oldest scar pulsed like a heartbeat. A boy stepped forward with a gourd of salt water. He poured it over her shoulders. The women gasped. Her skin hissed. Steam rose. But she didn't scream. Then came the fire. Dried palm fronds were lit and placed around her feet, soaked in oil. The flames leapt, cracked, danced. But the moment they reached her skin, they stopped. Not fizzled. Not dimmed. They froze. Suspended in the air, tongues of flame caught mid-motion like cloths in a windless storm. The priest staggered backward. Nena raised her hand. Her scars lit up, one by one, soft white light running in lines across her arms, her chest, her legs. Not bleeding. Not breaking. Just glowing. The pit grew quiet. Then someone screamed. It was her stepfather. He had pushed his way through the crowd, sneering, ready to spit. "Demon. That girl is not mine. Burn her." And it. But he froze mid-step. Literally. His feet locked in place. Cracks formed along his ankles. A fine dust began to pour from his toes. He looked down, and saw that his feet had turned white. Salt white. Hard. The salt spread upward fast. His legs stiffened. He stumbled, grabbing at others. They pulled away, screaming. He fell, half screaming, half choking. And when his hand reached out to Nena in one final attempt, it crumbled. His whole body turned to salt, then collapsed into the dust. The wind didn't move it. Nena didn't flinch. The flames still hung in the air, frozen. And her scars still glowed. Then someone in the crowd whispered, "She is not cursed." Another said, "She has been burned before." The priest dropped his staff. Nena looked up at the sky, her scars humming like a river through her bones. The trial was over. But the fire had chosen not to burn her. The path home felt longer than before. Not because Nena was tired, she wasn't. If anything, her body felt lighter, filled with something clear and ringing, like the sound of clean glass. But each step back toward the compound pressed into her with memory. Each tree past whispered what had happened. The dust underfoot remembered her tears. Even the stones shifted as she walked. The village watched from a distance. No one tried to follow. Her mother waited outside the compound gate, seated on a low stool, a folded cloth in her lap. She didn't rise when she saw Nena approach. She only looked at her with wide eyes, not full of fear but something deeper. Something like awe. The house itself had already begun to creak. Even before Nena reached the threshold, the walls murmured. The wood split quietly. The thatched roof swayed though there was no wind. The compound groaned under its own weight, as though the house knew who had returned. Nena walked up to the front door. She did not raise her voice. She did not cry. She only placed her palm against the wood and said, "You fed me salt to kill me. But I carry it now." The silence that followed was immense. Then the groaning deepened. From the center of the house came a great low crack, as if a bone too old to bear truth had finally snapped. The roof shuddered. One beam fell, then another. And then, without warning, the entire house folded inward. The walls collapsed in on themselves. The roof caved in like an old breath being let out. Dust rushed up into the air, rising in slow spirals. Nena did not move. The house fell around her, but not one shard touched her skin. Not one splinter grazed her shoulder. Even the dust parted around her feet. When the last sound faded, only a heap of broken wood remained. And then, from behind her, footsteps. Her mother stepped forward, still clutching the folded cloth. She walked across the crushed remains barefoot, untouched, her face streaked with ash but calm. When she reached Nena, she unfolded the cloth to reveal a single white grain, round, glowing faintly. The last grain of salt from the old jar. She held it up, then placed it in Nena's hand without a word. Nena looked down at it, then closed her fingers gently. The grain did not burn. It hummed. Time passed, and the name Nena no longer brought whispers of fear, but of reverence. She did not leave the village. She did not vanish into the forest like the ones in old tales. She stayed. Quietly. Simply. Like a root that had found its place in the soil and would no longer be moved. They called her, the girl with sacred scars. They said her skin remembered pain the way the earth remembered rain, not bitterly but with purpose. Women came first, quietly at dusk with old bruises beneath their wrappers, or wounds so deep they no longer showed on the body. They did not speak much. They simply asked to sit beside her. Some asked to touch her scars. She let them. And each time they did, something left their shoulders. A weight, a shadow, a silence. One woman wept for 3 days straight, then rose and returned to her husband with fire in her eyes. Another, a girl barely 13, spoke for the first time since her uncle disappeared, her voice. Men came too. Not many. Only the brave or the broken. One limped on a twisted foot that medicine had failed to fix. He pressed his forehead to the scar on Nena's wrist and walked away standing straight. Another had a stutter so bad he'd been mocked since childhood. He placed both hands on her back and for the first time, said his name without flinching. They brought gifts. Food. Fabric. Calabashes. But Nena accepted only salt. And so, in the center of the village they placed a wide wooden bowl, carved with symbols no one had taught her, but that her hands remembered. The bowl was filled with salt. Not the coarse, dry kind from the market but something finer. Glowing. Warm to the touch even in rain. It never emptied. No matter how much they took, how much they used to season food or mix into bath water, it refilled. Slowly. Patiently. Like it knew who needed it. They stopped calling it the cleansing bowl. They called it her voice. And though Nena never sought power, people began to gather around her like birds to water. She taught, not through lessons but through presence. Girls sat at her feet. Boys too. She taught them not just to speak but to listen. Not just to scream but to hold their pain in open hands and let it breathe. If they do not hear you, she once said, then let your silence hum until it becomes a drum. They listened. And the village changed. No girl was forced into rituals again. No mother stood silent while her daughter wept. Fathers began to speak gently not because they were weak, but because strength they learned could live in gentleness too. The house that had once beaten her became a garden. The pit that had tried to burn her grew over with lilies. And though the scars on Nena's body never faded, they no longer pulsed with pain. They glowed, like stars drawn close to earth. And anyone who touched them did not remember what hurt, only what healed.